The ship rocked gently in New York Harbor, its horn echoing through the morning fog as passengers boarded for the long journey to Southampton. Among them, two young women stood just feet apart, unaware their fates were about to collide. Both carried letters of engagement. Both were named Evelyn, but that's where their similarities ended. One, Evelyn Carter, was the daughter of a powerful senator, raised with elegance, grace, and the weight of expectation. Her blonde hair was tucked neatly beneath. Her hat, her spine straight, her gloves white as snow. The other, Evelyn Fields, had never known privilege. A shopkeeper's daughter from rural Georgia, she wore her nervousness like perfume. Her brown eyes scanned the bustling dock with wonder, clutching her only suitcase like it might vanish. In the confusion of boarding, a simple mistake unraveled everything. Their trunks, marked only by first names, were swapped, and with them, the documents, the letters, the identities. When the ship set sail, Evelyn Carter was assumed to be the modest merchant's daughter. Evelyn Fields was welcomed as the bride-to-be of a British nobleman, and neither one realized the error until it was far too late. But just before departure, Evelyn Fields caught sight of a man standing at the railing, staring out at sea with a posture that whispered loneliness. He looked nothing like the photograph she had seen, and yet her heart beat faster. Something inside her stirred, something that shouldn't have. Evelyn. Fields hadn't even unpacked when the knock came. A steward, impeccably dressed, bowed and said, "Lady Evelyn, the Earl's son has requested your presence in the private dining room." She opened her mouth to explain, to correct him, but the words stuck. Lady Evelyn. Her heart pounded. This wasn't her world, not her place, but something in her, the part that always stayed silent, whispered, "What if it could be?" She followed him, heels clicking on polished floors, past velvet curtains, and hushed. Voices, and then she saw him, tall, poised, yet entirely human in the flicker of candlelight. His face was nothing like the stiff photograph she had received. His eyes were tired, his smile cautious. "You must be Evelyn," he said, and for reasons she couldn't name, she nodded. But the other Evelyn, the one who should have been here, was somewhere else on this ship, and every second that passed pulled them both deeper into a lie neither had planned, a lie that could ruin everything, or rewrite their fate. And as she took the seat across from him, her hand trembled, because she didn't know how to undo what had just begun, and worse, she wasn't sure she wanted to. Evelyn Fields had never imagined herself on a ship like this. The RMS Caledonia was a floating palace. Velvet carpets, polished brass, chandeliers that swayed gently with the ocean's breath. Even the air smelled like money. And here she was, sitting at a table covered in linens finer than anything she'd ever touched, being served by men in white gloves. She should have said something. She should have spoken up the moment they mistook her for the senator's daughter. But the words had died on her tongue when she saw the way they treated her, as if she mattered, as if she belonged. For the first time in her life, no one looked down at her calloused hands. No one asked about her accent. And then came him, Lord Nathaniel Ashford. He was not what she expected, not stiff, not cold. He was quiet, too quiet, she thought at first. But when he spoke, it was with weight and thought. When he looked at her, it wasn't with arrogance, but with curiosity. "You're not like I imagined," he said during their first conversation. "Neither are you," she whispered back. The days passed in a blur of soft music, ocean sunsets and stolen glances. She told herself she was only playing a role until they docked in England. Then the truth would come out, and everything would return to its place. But each moment with him made the lie harder to let. Meanwhile, somewhere in another wing of the ship, Evelyn Carter paced her cabin in frustration. Her luggage was missing. The staff had addressed her as Miss Fields. When she tried to correct them, they smiled politely, dismissing her concerns as seasickness. And when she requested to meet Lord Ashford, the man she was supposed to marry, she was informed he was already entertaining his bride-to-be. "But I am his bride," she snapped. "Of course, madam," the steward said gently, and walked away. Confined to her cabin by confusion and embarrassment, Evelyn Carter began to suspect that something had gone horribly wrong. On the other side of the ship, Evelyn Fields was falling in love with a man who wasn't hers, and she knew with every passing day that the moment of truth was coming, and when it came she might lose everything. The mornings aboard the RMS Caledonia became something Evelyn Fields both anticipated and dreaded. She would wake in silk sheets, her body sinking into a bed softer than anything she had ever known, while her conscience reminded her, "You are not her, you do not belong here." And yet no one questioned her, not the maids who helped button her dress, not the waiters who bowed when she entered the dining room, not Lord Nathaniel Ashford, whose gaze lingered a little longer with each passing day. It was dangerous, how easily she slipped into this role. Nathaniel had invited her for tea again, this time on the upper deck, beneath a striped canopy that fluttered in the Atlantic wind. His coat was unbuttoned, his hair just slightly tousled by the sea, and for a moment he looked nothing like a future earl. "You're not what I expected," he said, pouring her tea. She smiled, a soft curve of her lips. "Neither are you." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And what did you expect?" "A man I couldn't talk to," she said honestly. "Someone colder. Someone already in love with himself." He laughed, a genuine sound, surprised even to him. "That sounds like half the House of Lords." Evelyn laughed too, but inside her heart clenched. If he knew who she really was, if he saw through the silk and silverware, would he still laugh with her? But what she didn't know was that someone had already begun to suspect. 2 decks below, Evelyn Carter slammed another drawer shut. Nothing. No letters, no dresses, no proof of her identity. Whoever had her things hadn't come forward, and the staff continued calling her Miss Fields with a polite smile and a dismissive nod. She tried again to demand an audience with Lord Ashford, only to be told for the 3rd time, "He's engaged with his fiancée this afternoon." Her blood boiled. "I am his fiancée," she wanted to scream. Instead, she took a deep breath. Something had gone horribly wrong, and it wasn't just the luggage. There was another woman on board, another Evelyn, and if her instincts were right, that woman was wearing her name, and sitting beside her intended. Back on the deck, Evelyn Fields felt the warmth of Nathaniel's hand brush hers as he reached for the sugar bowl. The contact was fleeting, accidental, and yet it lit something inside her chest she didn't want to name. "I've never met someone quite like you," he said, voice softer now. "Good different or bad different?" she whispered. He held her gaze. "The kind of different that makes me forget who I'm supposed to be." And just like that, the air shifted between them. But neither of them saw the steward standing near the stairwell, watching, listening, and quietly excusing himself with a bow, carrying a truth that could collapse the entire illusion. Lord Nathaniel had never been good at reading people. It was one of the many things his father used to scold him for. "You have the instincts of a poet," his father once said, "not a politician." But with Evelyn, this Evelyn, he couldn't stop reading between the lines. There was something in the way she spoke. Every word felt weighed, measured, not rehearsed exactly, but careful. As if there was a story behind her story, one she wasn't quite ready to share. And yet he didn't push. He found himself waiting for her to trust him. She wore no jewels, no heirlooms. Her dresses, though elegant, were always slightly too long in the sleeves or narrow at the waist, as if borrowed or gifted. Her laugh when it came was surprised, like she hadn't used it in a long time. But the biggest clue? It was the way she looked at him, not with entitlement, not with calculation, but with wonder, as if she hadn't expected him either. That evening, Evelyn Fields found herself staring into her reflection, brushing her hair slowly, watching her own face with the quiet fear of someone living in a borrowed skin. The lie was starting to hurt, but the truth would hurt more. She had fallen in love with him, not the idea of him, not the title or the life, but him, the man who read Byron aloud on the deck, the man who asked about her childhood as if it mattered, the man who looked at her as if she were real, and she knew. She wasn't. But what she didn't know was that someone had begun asking questions, quietly, carefully, with purpose. Evelyn Carter had enlisted the help of an unlikely ally, the ship's librarian. Together, they combed through the passenger manifests, noting where her original paperwork should have been. Evelyn Carter had connections, and her father's name opened doors, even in the middle of the Atlantic. And the deeper she looked, the more one truth became. Unavoidable. Someone was living her life. Meanwhile, Lord Nathaniel stood alone on the lower deck, the night air biting at his coat. He stared out at the stars, wondering how a simple engagement had turned into this labyrinth of emotion. He had agreed to marry out of duty, to unite estates, to preserve legacies. But duty never made him feel alive. This woman, this Evelyn, spoke of things he never dared confess. Her eyes mirrored his doubts. Her hands, calloused ever so slightly at the fingertips, told a different story than her polished smile. He knew something was off, but instead of stepping back, he leaned in, and on that night, under a sky so full of stars it could break a man's heart, he kissed her. It was soft, hesitant, terrified, and she kissed him back. For a moment, time stood still, but neither of them saw the silhouette watching from the stairwell, a figure frozen by the sight, a truth unveiled in the worst possible way. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. She sat at the edge of the bed in her borrowed cabin, the echo of Nathaniel's kiss still pressed against her lips like a memory too sweet to trust. How had it come to this? A name, a mistake, a moment of hesitation. That was all it took for the universe to twist itself into a version where she was no longer Evelyn Fields, daughter of a modest merchant. She had become Evelyn Carter, fiancée to a man born in palaces of marble and duty. And worst of all, it felt like home. But as the first light of dawn crept through the porthole, she knew it couldn't last. Yet what she didn't know was that Evelyn Carter wasn't the only one chasing the truth now. That same morning, Nathaniel received an envelope beneath his door. No name, just a sheet of paper inside with a single line. "Do you know who you're about to marry?" He stared at the words, the chill crawling down his spine faster than the wind outside. Who would send this? Why? He crumpled the note, but couldn't crush the doubt it planted. Not after the way she looked at him, not after the softness of her touch. There was honesty in her eyes, but was it the kind that came from truth or guilt? He needed answers. Evelyn Fields stood at the rail later that morning, her hands trembling as she watched the endless sea roll beneath the ship. Salt stung her eyes, not from wind, but from the weight of knowing she was deceiving a man who deserved far more than lies. She turned when she heard footsteps, and there he was. Nathaniel. His jaw was tight, and his voice even tighter. "Tell me something true," he said. She blinked, startled. "What?" "Anything. Anything real. Right now." Her heart thundered. She could lie. She could give him the answers he wanted, wrap herself in the illusion a little longer. But she didn't. "I play piano," she said softly. "Not well. My hands are clumsy, but I love the way it feels, the way it makes the world quieter." He studied her, and for a moment, the storm in his eyes softened. "And you?" He nodded once. "I once wanted to be a painter before they buried me in law books." They both laughed, brief, nervous, but real. But then a voice cut through the morning air, sharp, familiar. "Evelyn?" They both turned, and there she was, the other Evelyn, hair perfectly coiled, gloves buttoned to the wrist, eyes like daggers, Evelyn Carter. The world tilted, the illusion cracked, and for a single, excruciating second, the silence between the three of them screamed louder than the ocean. "I believe," said Evelyn Carter slowly, "we have something to discuss." And in that moment, Evelyn Fields realized the truth was no longer hiding. It had come to collect. The silence between the two Evelyns was thick, trembling like the air before a storm. Nathaniel looked from one to the other, his mind refusing to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. Identical letters, identical names. 2 women, 1 life. "What is this?" he asked, his voice rough. Evelyn Fields opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The words had abandoned her when she needed them most. Evelyn Carter, however, stepped forward with icy control. "This woman," she said, pointing with a gloved finger, "took my name, my cabin, my fiancé, and she let you believe it." Gasps whispered from nearby passengers. A sailor paused mid-step. The wind shifted. "I didn't plan this," Evelyn Fields said finally. Her voice cracked like porcelain. "It was a mistake. A stupid, impossible mistake." Nathaniel's gaze burned into her. "And when did you intend to tell me the truth?" Tears brimmed in her eyes. "When I had something to offer besides a lie." The truth hung between them, raw and jagged, but what they didn't know was that the captain had already been informed. Protocol would follow, and protocol had no place for love. That evening, Evelyn Fields was escorted to a small cabin at the back of the ship, not under arrest, but not free either. The crew treated her with quiet pity. No one looked her in the eye. Nathaniel hadn't come to see her. She stared at the grey walls and wondered what hurt more, the loss of her borrowed life or the silence from the man who had made it beautiful. Meanwhile, in his private quarters, Nathaniel paced like a man caught in a dream that had turned to nightmare. His mother's voice echoed in his head. "Marry for duty, Nathaniel. Love is for fools and poets." But hadn't love made him better? Hadn't it shown him what it felt like to be chosen? Not because of a title or name, but because of who he was beneath it all. He thought of Evelyn Fields, her quiet kindness, her laughter that came only when she forgot to be afraid. The way she looked at the world like it was a story still being written. He had seen her, and he had believed her. But could he forgive her? The next morning, Evelyn Fields was summoned to the captain's quarters. Evelyn Carter sat stiffly to the side, her chin lifted with the poise of someone born to win. The captain didn't shout. He didn't scold. Instead, he placed 2 envelopes on the table. "One is a letter of confession," he said. "It clears you of intentional fraud and permits you to disembark in Southampton under supervision." He gestured to the other. "The second is a personal statement. You can write anything in it, to anyone." Evelyn looked down at the blank pages and felt her chest tighten. Words had always been her escape. Now they were all she had left. She wrote through the night, and when she was done, she didn't sleep. She walked to the observation deck one last time, wrapped in a borrowed shawl, letting the wind steal the tears she didn't want anyone to see. And as she turned to leave, she found him standing there. Nathaniel. His eyes searched hers, not with anger, but with the weight of 1,000 unspoken things. "I got your letter," he said. She swallowed. "And?" "You told me the truth." "Finally." She nodded. "And in doing that," he added, stepping closer, "you gave me the one thing no one else ever has." Her breath caught. A choice. The ship docked in Southampton under a heavy sky. Grey clouds hovered like witnesses to the unravelling lives about to set foot on English soil. Evelyn Fields stood on the lower deck, her hat clutched between trembling hands. Her clothes, still borrowed, still not hers, suddenly felt like a costume from a play that had ended too soon. Nathaniel hadn't spoken much after reading her letter, not about forgiveness, not about a future, only that he needed time. Time. What a cruel word, when every heartbeat begged for now. Evelyn Carter disembarked first, her steps sharp and decisive. She didn't look back. Why would she? She was returning to the world that had always belonged to her. Evelyn Fields stepped next, and there, waiting at the dock, stood Lord Whitmore, the father of Nathaniel, a tall man in a dark coat, posture rigid, expression carved from centuries of expectation. He looked directly at Evelyn, not with contempt, but with calculation. "You are the impostor," he said plainly. She flinched, but nodded. Then you've caused a scandal that may cost my family dearly. I never meant— Intentions, he interrupted, rarely matter when reputation bleeds. She lowered her gaze, but his next words caught her by surprise. But my son, he continued, is not a boy anymore. He can make his own decisions. She looked up, and Lord Whitmore added more quietly, though I pray he chooses wisely. What she didn't know was that Nathaniel was watching, just steps away, listening, torn. That evening, in the quiet of a small inn beyond the port, Evelyn Fields sat alone with a cup of untouched tea. Her new room was plain, no silk, no perfumes, no letters hidden beneath pillows, only silence, and the ache of absence. The knock on her door startled her. When she opened it, Nathaniel stood there soaked from the drizzle outside. His coat clung to him, his hair slightly damp, but his eyes burned with decision. I walked away, he said. I tried. I told myself you weren't who I thought. She swallowed hard. And I realized, maybe you weren't. Maybe you were more. He stepped in, closing the door behind him. You lied. But you also taught me how to breathe again. You reminded me that love isn't born from names or titles, but from truth shared in the quietest of moments. She couldn't speak, so he did. I don't care what you were called on that ship. I care who you are when you laugh, when you cry, when you look at me like I'm worth more than a signature on a family. Agreement, he paused, voice lower. But if we do this, it can't be in hiding. Evelyn's voice finally broke free. I don't want to hide anymore. They stood there in the stillness, the storm outside retreating, the warmth between them slowly building like dawn over the sea. But as they embraced, a knock at the door again. Nathaniel opened it to find a messenger, breathless. A summons from Lord Whitmore, the boy said. Urgent. Nathaniel took the note and unfolded it. His face darkened. What is it? Evelyn asked. He looked at her, torn. My father has arranged a formal hearing tomorrow with the press. She gasped. What? Why? He's giving me a chance to choose, he said, but he's making sure the world watches when I do. And just like that, their love was no longer a secret to protect, but a battle they would have to fight in the light. The drawing room of Lord Whitmore's estate was colder than the autumn wind that rolled in from the moors. High ceilings, ancestral portraits, and a silence so thick it could crush a breath. Nathaniel stood tall in the center, his posture proud but restless. Evelyn Fields, seated beside him, felt every eye in the room like a weight pressing against her spine. Reporters, distant family, influential allies, all summoned by Lord Whitmore himself for what he called an honorable clarification. But this was no clarification. It was a spectacle. Lord Whitmore entered with the poise of a general, his voice steady as he addressed the room. My son was to marry Evelyn Carter, he began, a match befitting both legacy and future. He paused, allowing tension to stir. But a complication arose. A woman assumed another's identity. Whether by accident or ambition, the result is the same. Our name stands questioned. Gasps and murmurs followed. Evelyn Carter sat off to the side, her eyes cold and unreadable. She didn't smile, but the tilt of her chin betrayed satisfaction. Lord Whitmore turned to Nathaniel. Now, before our guests and the press, I ask you, as a Whitmore, as a man, who is your bride? The room held its breath. Evelyn Fields felt her heart pound like a war drum. Her hands trembled in her lap. Nathaniel looked at his father, then at Evelyn, and finally at the crowd. I was raised to value lineage, duty, and structure, he began, but none of that taught me how to feel. He stepped toward Evelyn Fields. This woman, despite her deception, showed me what it means to love without condition. To see a soul beyond a surname, whispers surged. She may not be who the invitations named, but she is who my heart recognized. He turned to his father. And if you ask me to deny that for the sake of legacy, then you've taught me nothing at all. A silence followed that stretched like the ocean between ships. But then, A voice rose from the back. "She's the one who made him smile again," said an elderly aunt softly. "He never smiled like that with the Carter girl." Laughter broke the tension, and in that fragile, unexpected moment, truth began to win. Lord Whitmore's expression didn't soften, but he gave a single nod. "The scandal will cost us," he said, almost to himself, "but perhaps love buys what money can't." Evelyn's eyes flooded. She couldn't breathe, until Nathaniel reached for her hand and held it firm and unashamed. They walked out together, not hidden, not hurried, but seen. But just as peace began to settle, Evelyn Carter stood and smiled. "Let them have each other," she said sweetly. "But do remember, the name Carter doesn't disappear quietly." Nathaniel stopped. Evelyn turned. "What do you mean?" he asked. She shrugged. "Ask the newspapers. Tomorrow's front page might be more colorful than today's declarations." And just like that, a new storm threatened, one born not of mistake, but of vengeance. The next morning, a heavy mist clung to the Whitmore estate like a secret refusing to lift. It blurred the horizon, but not the consequences. In the town square, newspapers hit the stands, with headlines that screamed scandal. "Wrong bride at sea, transatlantic deception rocks the Whitmore legacy." Evelyn Fields stood frozen, her name sprawled across the page. Letters she had written, private thoughts, excerpts from her correspondence with Nathaniel, all published. Only one person could have leaked them: Evelyn Carter. Nathaniel stared at the front page, jaw clenched. The timing was brutal, the intention clear. "She wants to burn everything on her way out," he muttered. Evelyn's hands trembled. "This will ruin you, your family, everything." But Nathaniel turned to her, voice calm but unwavering. "No, Evelyn, this won't ruin us. It will reveal us." What neither of them knew was how fast the fire would spread. Outside the estate, a crowd gathered: journalists, nobility, curious townsfolk, some holding their breath for a fall from grace, others eager to see if love could actually win against legacy. Inside, Lord Whitmore sat in his study, gripping the newspaper like it was poison. The scandal risked decades of influence, business partnerships, and political favor, and yet, when Nathaniel and Evelyn entered the room, he didn't dismiss them. Instead, he looked up with tired but focused eyes. "We've built a reputation over generations," he said quietly. "But maybe it's time we built something else, something honest." Nathaniel approached his father. "If you'll stand by us, not out of duty, but belief, then we can survive this." Lord Whitmore nodded, slow but sure. "So be it." But Evelyn wasn't afraid of the press, not really. Her greatest fear was facing the people. That afternoon she walked into the village alone, no guards, no carriages, just her among the whispers. Some looked away, some glared, but an elderly florist stepped out from her stall and placed a small bouquet into Evelyn's hands. "You made a mistake," she said kindly, "but you didn't run. That says more than any headline." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. "Thank you." "Keep your chin up, dear," the woman added. "The real ones always do." And in that brief, beautiful moment, Evelyn realized the world might gossip, but not all of it would condemn. Later that evening, she returned to the estate. Nathaniel was in the garden, in the same place they first spoke. She walked straight to him. "You faced them," he said with a smile. "Not alone," she replied. He reached for her hand, and she didn't hesitate. But just as peace began to settle, a letter arrived. The seal was unmistakable. Lady Ashmore of London, Queen of High Society. Nathaniel opened it. The words were crisp and deliberate. "You are cordially invited to a winter ball at Ashmore Hall. Society is eager to meet the couple behind the scandal." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "So, we're the entertainment now?" Nathaniel laughed, but there was tension underneath. "If they want a show, we'll give them something unforgettable." She looked out across the garden, then back at him. "Let's show them who I really am." And so, the stage was set, not for a scandal but for a reckoning. The ballroom at Ashmore Hall shimmered under chandeliers imported from Vienna, each crystal casting rainbows across the marble floor. Laughter echoed through the corridors, but it was laced with something sharper: anticipation. They were the subject of whispers behind fans and champagne flutes. Evelyn Fields and Nathaniel Whitmore, the scandalous pair who dared to love across names, classes, and countries. As their carriage pulled up to the grand entrance, Evelyn felt her stomach twist into knots. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet, elegant and modest, but every step felt like walking into a battlefield, not a party. "Smile," Nathaniel whispered as he offered his arm. "Even if your heart is pounding." "It's not pounding," she lied. "It's preparing for war." The doors opened. Silence. Then, like a dam breaking, murmurs spread across the room. Heads turned. Some faces held curiosity, others veiled disdain. Lady Ashmore approached. So them, radiant in pearls and diplomacy. "Miss Fields," she said with a nod that was just short of polite, "I do hope you'll enjoy this evening." "I intend to," Evelyn replied, steady. But the night would test her more than she imagined. What she didn't expect was her past to walk through the very same doors. Evelyn Carter, radiant, vengeful, dressed in red silk and revenge. She swept into the ballroom like a storm, her gaze locking onto Evelyn with icy precision. "Surprised," she purred. "You didn't think I'd miss the grand finale, did you?" Nathaniel's hand tightened on Evelyn's back. "This isn't your stage anymore." "Oh, but it is," Evelyn Carter said, lips curving into a smug smile. "You may have stolen my fiancé, but let's see how society receives your truth," Lady Ashmore intervened. "Let us not turn this into a spectacle, ladies." But it was already too late. The music resumed, but the air had changed. Stares lingered. Conversations shifted. It wasn't a ball anymore. It was a trial. Nathaniel led Evelyn onto the dance floor, trying to protect her from the weight of the room. "I'm sorry you're in this," he said softly. "I'm not," she replied, "because I'm in it, with you." But even as they danced, Evelyn knew the final blow hadn't landed yet. As the waltz ended, a new guest took the floor, Lord Whitmore. He stepped forward, commanding attention like a general entering a war zone. "I've come not as a peer nor a politician," he announced, "but as a father and as a man who nearly lost sight of what truly matters." Gasps echoed. He turned to the crowd. "My son has chosen love, not scandal, and this young woman," he gestured to Evelyn, "has shown more dignity under fire than most of you show in comfort." The silence that followed was thunderous. Evelyn couldn't breathe. Nathaniel took her hand, and then applause. Tentative at first, then strong. A wave of unexpected support. Lady Ashmore inclined her head ever so slightly. Acceptance, at last. In that moment, Evelyn knew they had not just survived the fire. They had rewritten their place in its ashes. But as she looked toward the crowd, her eyes fell once more on Evelyn Carter, retreating through a side door, her glare still burning. One chapter had closed, but another threat still loomed. Snow blanketed the hills surrounding the Whitmore estate, transforming the world into a quiet canvas of white. The storm had passed, at least publicly. The gossip columns began softening their tone. Invitations, once withheld, were now arriving again. But within Evelyn another kind of storm brewed, quieter, colder, and far more dangerous. Because Evelyn Carter wasn't gone, and she hadn't given up. Letters arrived anonymously. Rumors whispered behind closed doors. Discreet inquiries about Evelyn Fields' real origins. Someone was trying to dig deeper, to unearth something not yet exposed. And deep down, Evelyn feared they would find it. One evening, as Evelyn sorted through the estate's mail, she froze. A single envelope. No return address. Inside, a photograph of her childhood home in Georgia, burned to the ground. No note, just the image, a warning or a message. Nathaniel found her sitting on the stairs, the photo trembling in her hand. "What is it?" he asked gently. She handed it to him, unable to speak. He scanned the image, jaw tightening. This was deliberate. Evelyn finally whispered, "Someone wants to remind me I don't belong." He knelt before her. "No one defines where you belong." Not anymore, but the unease lingered. The following days were quiet, too quiet. Evelyn took to walking the estate grounds alone, lost in thought, unsure of who she could trust outside Nathaniel. Until one afternoon, a familiar figure appeared at the gate, Evelyn's childhood friend, Clara. She hadn't seen her in years, not since before the voyage. "How did you find me?" Evelyn asked, stunned. Clara smiled nervously. "You're all over the papers, Evie." They walked through the orchard, their footsteps crunching the frost-covered grass. "I came to warn you," Clara said finally. "There's someone asking questions. About your name. About the switch on the ship." "Who?" Evelyn whispered. Clara hesitated. "A man. English. Paid well. Said he was seeking justice." But justice for who, and at what cost? Evelyn's mind raced. Was Evelyn Carter orchestrating a final strike? Had she hired someone to legally dismantle her? Nathaniel insisted they go to Lord Whitmore, and they did. But he surprised them. "I knew," Lord Whitmore said quietly. "Not at first, but I pieced it together weeks ago." Shock silenced the room. "And yet you stayed silent?" Nathaniel asked. "I wanted to see who you truly were when no title was left to stand on," his father replied, gaze on Evelyn. "And what I saw that earned my respect." Evelyn's voice cracked. "You believe I'm worthy? I believe you've proven it." But just as trust began to grow roots, a telegram arrived, a summons, from London. Evelyn. Fields was to appear before a royal inquiry, under suspicion of fraud. London. Grey skies and colder stares welcomed Evelyn as she stepped into the grand chamber where the inquiry would be held. The room was high-ceilinged and quiet, the kind of silence that weighed more than sound. Nathaniel stood beside her, his hand wrapped tightly around hers, a silent vow that whatever happened, they would face it together. The accusations were read aloud: fraud, identity misrepresentation, deceit in courtship with an English noble, each word cut sharper than the last. But then Evelyn stood and spoke. Her voice was calm, not defiant, not ashamed. "None of this began as a plan," she said, eyes sweeping across the faces watching her. "I didn't intend to steal anything. Not a name, not a life, and certainly not a heart." She paused, swallowing emotion. "But life gave me a name that wasn't mine, and love gave me a choice, to keep lying, or to tell the truth and risk losing everything." Gasps rippled. "I chose love, and I choose it still." The room fell silent, and then a decision. The inquiry ruled in her favor. No malicious intent, no fraud. She would be free, legally, but reputations, society, the whispers would linger. They always did. Still, Evelyn walked out of that room with her head high, because for the first time in her life, she had nothing to hide, and everything to hold. Back at Ashmore Hall, weeks later, the snow began to melt. Evelyn stood on the same terrace, where she once doubted everything. She looked out at the land, at the life she had helped rebuild, and beside her Nathaniel, not as her savior, but as her partner. "What now?" he asked. She smiled. "We live, fully, truthfully, even when it's hard." He kissed her forehead. And in that kiss was the promise. They had not just survived, they had transformed. Sometimes life hands us a role we never auditioned for, a name, a title, a place that doesn't feel like ours. And yet, somewhere between the mistakes and the unexpected, we find something truer than we ever imagined. Love isn't about perfection, it's about the courage to choose, again and again, even when everything tries to pull you apart. Now it's your turn. What would you have done in Evelyn's place? Would you have kept the truth hidden, or risked it all for love? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. And before you go, if this story stirred your heart, hit the like button, subscribe for more timeless romances,